Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Thursday, October 30th. Now, before I dive into the strategic situation, I'd just like to remind you that tomorrow, Harley Schlanger will be back with you, back from a busy day today, for his Friday question and answer session. So for those of you that would like to submit a question to Harley, you can do so at questions@laroucheorganization.com or directly to Harley's email if you have that, which I think he's mentioned on previous shows, but I think for the moment, questions@laroucheorganization.com. Now, in terms of summarizing the strategic crisis and the opportunity that lies in that crisis, I would just refer to what Trump announced on the resumption of nuclear weapons testing. We would effectively join North Korea as the only other nation in this century, at least that's known about. But North Korea is the only other nation that has done nuclear weapons testing. We've had a long time ban on such testing, but apparently, according to Trump, we will be resuming that. Now, that announcement was made in the run-up to his meeting with Xi Jinping. Trump, of course, was on an Asian tour surrounding the APEC summit and so forth, met with leaders of South Korea, but then the big meeting was that with Xi Jinping. I don't have a lot of other reports on the results of that meeting. Some of them are still coming in. But according to Trump, they discussed at some length the situation in Ukraine. Trump said, "We are both going to work together to see if we can get something done in terms of a resolution on the Ukraine crisis." He said that he and Xi Jinping agree that the sides are locked in fighting, and sometimes you got to let them fight, I guess. But Xi is going to help us, and we are going to work together on Ukraine. Not a lot more we can do. So this, of course, is according to Trump. We don't quite have a readout on what, from the Chinese side, what the results of those discussions were. But certainly bringing China into the discussions would be important. They, of course, had the Chinese made a proposal in May of 2023 on a resolution of the Ukraine crisis. It was kind of a general statement. It had certain specifics around the grain deal, and, safety around nuclear power plants and other matters. But there was very specific references, or very thematic references, statements of principle, I should say, on the matters of maintaining a commitment to the principles of the UN Charter, the United Nations Charter, the non-interventionism and maintenance of sovereignty of nations, and so on and so forth, and abandoning the Cold War mentality. So those were some of the elements that came from their proposal in May of 2023. And then a year later, May of last year, I'm sorry, that actually was February, but anyway, in May of last year, they had another proposal along with Brazil, effectively as a statement from the nations of the global south, or more accurately, the global majority, that they maintained their commitment to ending the crisis, and particularly the root causes of this crisis. Now, they won't say it as directly as we would say it, but many of these nations have said it, but they understand, the nations of the global majority, the BRICS nations and so on, understand that this crisis has very little to do with Ukraine. It has to do with the clash of the two systems, namely the dying imperial financial system out of London, the City of London and Wall Street and other European lackeys, which, that system has already collapsed. It's been based on looting the global majority at the end of a nuclear-tipped bayonet, as well as looting, or maybe I should say cannibalizing, the productive forces of the transatlantic, the United States and Europe, where the same model it's the same. Take the assets, whether it's from the global nations of the global majority or whether it's asset stripping of once productive manufacturing and industrial facilities in the United States and Europe, and use those assets as the basis of leverage for exotic financial instruments that can bring in a lot more money, so-called money, but it's money on paper, and not money that's backed up by anything productive. And I just want to reference something that has come up in the recent period, I think, as an example of this cannibalization, but there's been strikes in the last week on workers within the companies of the military industrial complex. Their wages, according to their accounts, are even less than the toilet bowl cleaners at the local gas stations. And moreover, the skilled labor force of these highly precise, you're talking millionths of an inch precision machining and so on to produce these weapon systems. But the skilled labor force is retiring. They're not doing adequate training and so on. Meanwhile, though, of course, for the payments to the investors of the military industrial complex who have seen their stock prices skyrocket with all of these global crises, those payouts collectively are, approaching the range of the 100 billion or many tens of billions of dollars annually as a payout to the investors. So in other words, the very premise of our ability to loot the global majority, again, with this military force, is we don't even have the capabilities to maintain that. And of course, we've seen that on the battlefields of Ukraine, where we've used that nation as a proxy force, and we don't even have the productive capabilities to send weapons to the increasingly non-existent troops there. So I think, but all of this is a result of this cannibalization process that we've seen in the transatlantic system. And for those of you that want a heuristic approach for how to think about this, I encourage you to study LaRouche's triple curve, which explores the hyperbolic growth of monetary and financial assets and the relationship between those two, premised on the looting of the physical economy, which is at a hyperbolic decay scenario. So you can see that and what that looks like in the final phase of the collapse, which we are now in. And that is, I think it was at the premise of what LaRouche said in terms of that this system already collapsed. He said this in 2007 on the eve of what is now referred to as the 2008 financial collapse, that it could never be revived in that form. It can never be revived now. It has been propped up by various forms of bailouts and other financial scams, whether it was through the COVID crisis, whether it's through the whole militarization that we've seen around these wars and so on. Did Wall Street heed LaRouche's advice at that time, which was to enact Glass-Steagall, put the system through a bankruptcy reorganization, and then move on LaRouche's 4 laws conception, which includes Hamilton's design for a credit policy backed up by the advancements in fusion and the related development infrastructure platform systems that LaRouche designed that would enable a higher leap to a new platform of development? Of course not. Instead, the geniuses out of the city of London and Wall Street decided that they were not going to go with what they referred to. It's reported that the British told their counterparts in the United States that if the U.S. had gone with Glass-Steagall and a bankruptcy reorganization of their rotten financial system, that this would be seen as a casus belli, a cause of war. So instead, they launched the Maidan coup d'etat in 2013 and the Asia pivot to contain China. This was done under the presidency of Barack Obama as a puppet of the puppet masters out of London and Wall Street. And the aim was to ensure that what China initiated at that same time, launching the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, and the beginning of the advancement of the BRICS, what some call the multipolar system, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and so on, but what Vladimir Putin, I think, has more accurately summed up as the polyphonic global system of all nations under the same principles of the actual cooperation amongst humanity, that those nations could cooperate and develop and have their security arrangements be based on that right to development. So that was the British response. And so what we're now seeing is that we've come to a moment of decision in this global crisis. We have the encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd on the Ukraine battlefield. Some 10,000 troops plus are in this encirclement, according to the Russians. Many analysts have said that without that logistics hubs, the logistic hub of Pokrovsk, that the ability for Ukraine to maintain this war is non-existent, and that that's effectively the end of the war. And so we've seen the insanity coming out of France, where Macron has announced that the French, well, hasn't announced it yet, the Russian intelligence has claimed that the French will be deploying their Foreign Legion forces, some 2,000 troops there, either as a tripwire or maybe to try to bolster what's left of the collapsing Ukraine front. So in terms of the conventional war in Ukraine, or on the battlefields of Ukraine, it's over. There's no way we can win. We don't have the productive forces. We have cannibalized that, even that, of all of our everything else that we've cannibalized in terms of our infrastructure and manufacturing capability. But the very premise of maintaining the British imperial system, we can't even do that. But and so I think this comes back to this question of Trump resuming the nuclear testing. This will undoubtedly trash the potential for any non-proliferation agreements, the last of which we have the START Treaty, which is set to expire in February of 2026. Putin made the proposal, of course, that they would be willing to extend that treaty for a year as is until a new one can be negotiated, but so far mum has been the word from the Trump administration in response. But I think what is the point of maintaining this nuclear deterrence? Number one, as Ted Postal did on the International Peace Coalition meeting, which I encourage you to watch, the idea that there's any survivability or that a nuclear war can be won is utterly insane, and he goes through that in horrific depth. So I encourage you to watch that. But otherwise, look at what the Russians have just done in the recent period. You've had the announcement of the Burevestnik missile, which is a loitering missile that is powered by nuclear power, of course, nuclear capable in terms of its armament, but effectively can loiter in the skies until it is deployed. Some say that forever obviously isn't the right term, but as long as needed to provide that deterrence. The other, of course, is the recent announcement on the Poseidon, which is a underwater torpedo that also is nuclear powered in terms of its propulsion, but is of course nuclear capable in terms of its armaments, which some have described as being capable of releasing a radioactive tsunami that could effectively flood the eastern and western seaboards of the United States and destroy us. So, I mean, this is insane, and that, of course, comes on the back of the Burevestnik, which has already been battlefield tested. We don't, obviously, the others haven't been battlefield tested, but I think we should take the Russians at their word on their announcement that they probably do indeed have these weapons capable of being deployed. So all of this is just utterly insane. We don't know whether this is in terms of the continued nuclear proliferation issues or the threat around the nuclear weapons that are being proposed on behalf of the Western powers, whether this is the British designs for what they called the Cuban Missile Crisis on steroids. That was the Rusi paper from a year or two ago, or whether they want to just unleash a full-blown statement. But I think in this context, there's no resolution other than what Helga Zepp-LaRouche laid out in her webcast yesterday. And that is where she cited the importance of what the Pope did on announcing, or in his statements surrounding Nicholas of Cusa. That is the coincidence of opposites. And what the Pope said at I think it was last week, he said that in another troubled age, the 15th century, when many of his contemporaries lived in fear, others took up arms, Cusa believed in humanity. He understood that there are opposites which must be held together. And what Helga said in her webcast is, she said, I think that it is, in my view, probably the most important strategic intervention. That is the Pope's statements on Cusa. And she said, because what the Pope does is he elevates the discussion to a plane where a solution is possible. So I encourage you to watch Helga's presentation from yesterday, but if you are not familiar with Cusa's ideas, I would just briefly say that it goes beyond, it rules out or destroys the binary systems that we are often presented in any imperial system. And what do I mean by a binary system? Well, consider the whole digital platforms today, the yes or no, or like or dislike, thumbs up, thumbs down, where you're presented with certain views that that's supposedly that's your only options. Same thing applies to the financial world. Interest rates up, interest rates down. And similarly within the proliferation issues of nuclear weapons surrounding the mutually assured destruction, all of these binary modalities cannot, that as LaRouche once famously, or was said on numerous occasions, when presented with two options, go with the third, especially when those options are presented by the British. And so what is needed is to do what human beings do, is we transcend what seems to be presented as our options and come up with new ideas, new science, new technology that enables us to develop and expand. So I think that's the way that we have to approach this. This is what Helga has done in terms of the crisis that we see, whether it's the proposals that we've had for the Bering Strait tunnel connection, whether it's the Oasis plan, or whether it was for Southwest Asia, or whether it was LaRouche's idea for the Strategic Defense Initiative to dismiss this insanity of the mutually assured destruction. It's always come up with a creative idea that can get you out of the binary system imposed by the imperial system. So again, submit your questions for Harley tomorrow. That's questions@LaRoucheOrganization.com. And otherwise, sign up for the International Peace Coalition tomorrow, where some of these important issues will be taken up, and you can find out what you can do in this crisis. And otherwise, stay tuned to the LaRouche Organization.